You know, we all use labels. We call people lazy, cold, arrogant. But what if those labels aren't just wrong, but they're actually hiding a much more interesting story? Well, in this explainer, we're going to peel back those labels and look at the hidden logic behind some of the most common judgments we make about people.
Just think about it for a second. That person you know who seems lazy, what if their inaction is actually a form of really deep strategic thinking? Or what about that friend you might label as cold? What if that distance is actually a fortress they had to build just to survive? Today we're going to challenge those snap judgments we all make by looking for the logic that's hidden just beneath the surface.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll lay out the big idea, the mind's hidden logic. Then we're going to apply that idea to 4 classic misunderstood traits, from the lazy dreamer all the way to the person who, laughs at exactly the wrong time. And finally, we'll pull it all together and hopefully give you a whole new way to understand the people around you.
To really get people, really get them, we have to look past the obvious stuff. Psychology teaches us that even the most frustrating behaviors usually have some kind of internal logic. There's a why behind the what, and our goal today is to uncover it.
Okay, so here's the core idea, the big takeaway for this whole thing. The human brain is basically an adaptation machine. What we see on the surface as a character flaw is often an unconscious strategy, a clever, hidden way to manage energy, protect against pain, or just make sense of a really complicated world. It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Let's start with a classic paradox, one you've probably seen before, the ambitious procrastinator. This is the person with massive dreams, right? They want to change the world, but they seem totally paralyzed when it comes to taking that first simple step on a project.
On the surface, what do we see? We see a lack of discipline. We think they're unmotivated. But the psychological reality? Oh, it's way more complex. This isn't about a lack of motivation. It's that their motivation is just tuned to a different frequency, one that gets excited by the huge grand outcome, not the boring day-to-day process.
So psychologically, what's going on is their brain is constantly running this little cost-benefit analysis. They resist any effort that feels inefficient or like a waste of time. Their internal reward system is wired for the big finish line, not the daily grind. And all that planning they do, that's not them being lazy. That's real hard cognitive work. By the time they're supposed to actually do the thing, a lot of their mental energy is already gone.
And this quote just hits the nail on the head. It really shines a light on the hidden role of perfectionism here. When you have super high internal standards, just starting a task can feel incredibly risky. The fear of not doing it perfectly makes it feel safer to just wait and wait for the ideal moment, rather than to start imperfectly. So get this, the ambition itself becomes the very source of the inaction. Wild, right?
All right, next up, let's talk about the person who often gets labeled cold or distant, the one who seems like they just don't need anyone. And this is honestly one of the most common and often most painful misinterpretations we make. What we see as coldness is actually often a highly developed, super practiced form of emotional control. This person doesn't avoid connection because they don't want it. They hesitate because their life experience has taught them, over and over again, that relying on other people is a huge risk. And the roots of this trait often go way back, usually to childhood. See, when emotional support is inconsistent or unreliable, the brain adapts. It learns to manage its emotions internally, to solve problems all by itself, and to just push its own needs down. It's a smart, adaptive response to an environment where being self-reliant was pretty much the only reliable option. Psychology actually has a name for this. It's called parentification. It's what happens when a child is forced to become the adult in the room, taking on responsibilities way too early. They learn to be the calm, capable one because, well, there's no alternative. This forces them to mature super fast, but it comes at a cost. They never learn how to receive care, only how to provide it. And that right there is often the root of the coldness we see. And this is the key. This is what we really need to understand. This deep-seated independence, this strength, it wasn't a personality preference they chose to get ahead in the world. No, it was a protective shield they had to forge just to survive their early environment.
Next up, let's talk about the person who questions everything. You know the one, they challenge authority, they pick apart the rules, and they often get labeled as arrogant, disrespectful, or just being a contrarian for the sake of it.
But what if this isn't about ego at all? Psychology suggests that for a lot of these folks, it's a cognitive style, not a character flaw. Their brain is just wired to analyze, not to simply accept. It's not that they want to be difficult. It's that they are incredibly sensitive to logical flaws and inconsistencies. Look,
Highly analytical minds don't just follow rules because they exist. They need to understand the why behind them. Their brain is this amazing pattern recognition machine, and when a system doesn't make logical sense, it creates this mental static. They trust their own reasoning because honestly, it's served them well their whole lives.
And this is absolutely fascinating. This ability to pause and question, instead of just automatically agreeing, it's actually a sign of a high-level brain function called cognitive inhibition. It's like a mental break that stops that automatic impulse to just go along with things. So that little pause, that moment of hesitation that looks like defiance, it's actually deep thinking in action.
But not all these misunderstood traits come from such deliberate thought. Some are just pure, unfiltered physiological responses, which brings us to our final, and maybe most jarring example, the person who laughs in serious, tense, or even tragic situations. Now, psychology tells us to stop looking at the laugh itself and start looking at the nervous system. This is not a sign of malice or a lack of empathy. In fact, it often signals the exact opposite. It's a physiological response to being completely emotionally overwhelmed.
Here's basically how it works. When emotional tension, like stress or grief, builds up to an unbearable level, our nervous system desperately seeks a release valve, and laughter, it's one of the fastest, most effective ways to release that pressure. It's an involuntary biological safety valve, not a conscious choice to be disrespectful.
So, the crucial point here is this. Nervous laughter isn't about not caring. It's very often a sign of caring so much that the emotional circuits just get overloaded and the brain has to perform an emergency reboot. The emotional sensitivity is high, not low.
So, we've looked at 4 really different traits, right? Procrastination, emotional distance, questioning everything, and even nervous laughter. What's the common thread here? What possibly connects the ambitious dreamer, the independent survivor, the analytical questioner, and the person who laughs at a funeral? The common thread is adaptation. That's it. In every single one of these cases, the mind is quietly, cleverly working to solve a problem. How to manage energy, how to protect a vulnerable heart, how to find logic in a flawed world, or how to survive an emotional overload. The behaviors we judge so quickly are simply the mind's solutions. So at the end of the day, the choice is ours. We can default to judgment, which is easy, or we can choose curiosity. And shifting our perspective, it doesn't just make us more compassionate, it actually makes us more accurate. Because once you start looking for the hidden logic instead of the obvious flaw, you start to see people, and maybe even yourself, in a completely new light.